Stephen cast a meaningful look at the Ascenders. This is our opportunity to detonate the ammunition at the bottom of the lake. Even if the guards notice, it'll be too late. The 5 of them lit up with anticipation. Without the lake water, the secret the Asura King left behind would come to light. Killian and Stephen's team had contributed the most in the final battle, and as Ascenders, they were embarrassed to take advantage of them. Aren't you interested? Faye urged. A god's secret is about to be revealed to the world. Shouldn't you be preparing to pick up the scraps? In case you haven't noticed, our enemies are still around, Stephen replied. Anything can happen. You're too fixated on worldly possessions. If Tristan were here, he would have had the same reaction as the Ascenders. He valued treasures as much as his own life. Stephen was different. His priority was to ensure everyone's safety and help Killian win the war. Whatever's in that lake was created by the Asura King, Faye said. If the chiefs or the guards get their hands on it, they'd become even stronger than they are now. Don't let the lake out of your sight if you want to win. Stephen hadn't thought about it like that. The Ascenders were whimsical, but they were experienced. If the secret beneath the lake was what they expected it to be, he would have to think of a way to destroy it. The ground shook, and the water spun in a whirlpool at the center of the lake. Killian's mount flew out of the water. The 2 guards were hot on its heels, but they didn't give chase. While they were in the water, they'd noticed something amiss. They shouted at the other guards to warn them. There was an explosion at the bottom of the lake. The water's draining into the ground. They barely got the words out before another group of meteors crashed into the lake. The explosion evaporated the water, and vapor rose into the sky. None of the guards or the Asura knew how long Liam's technique would last. Branches and leaves drifted in the wind, fluttered over the lake. Even the divine tree couldn't compete with the power of nature. Liam's technique went beyond Killian's expectations. He'd stayed in the air to add fuel to the fire. Pitch-black clouds gathered around him overhead. Lightning flashed, and a clap of thunder tore the sky. A storm of lightning struck the shore. The Asuras were too busy dodging the meteors and weren't expecting another attack from above. The lightning was much faster than the meteors. They were torn apart before they even knew what was happening. The Asura commanders flew into the air and sliced the lightning with their weapons, but they couldn't destroy it. The lightning shattered into fragments that scattered over the shore. They were as sharp as blades and as paralyzing as electricity. The divine tree was struggling to defend against the meteors. The guards pressured the chiefs to take action, and the 4 of them lunged for Killian. The group from Tempest Citadel went over to Stephen. Where did the water go? The elders asked. We need its energy to fix the spatial rift. There's a mine around 20 miles away. The water's draining there. The elders nodded and left with their team. Everyone had their own priorities and responsibilities. Tempest Citadel didn't seem interested in the Asura King's secret. Maybe this was their way of proving that they were as righteous as they claimed to be. When the lake was completely drained, bright red mud was left behind. The threadworm's tunnels were glaringly conspicuous without the cover of the water. Over 1,000 meteors had fallen before Liam's technique ran its course. The lake was bombarded beyond recognition. Craters were everywhere. Without an external energy source, the divine tree had to rely on the energy it had already absorbed to attack the outsiders. Killian and the beasts were reaching their limit. The chiefs weren't that far off. Their energy was low to begin with, and they'd lost all hope of winning. The 5 guards didn't move. Without the energy from the water, they had nothing to sustain their fortified bodies except the energy the tree had absorbed. Their strength was limited. Instead of attacking, they were locked in a stare-down with the Ascenders. Eventually, Vlad lost his patience, and he dashed to the lake. His sword radiated a dazzling light. He struck the mud, and his inner energy spread through the earth. The guards and the chiefs rushed to stop him, but before they could get to him, cracks ran along the mud, and a pillar of light erupted into the sky. The secret of the Asura's holy land was revealed. The Asura King had stored his divine armor at the bottom of the lake. His helmet, chestplate, gauntlets, and war boots rose towards the clouds. Stephen sensed the fluctuations in energy from the armor. There really were treasures in the lake, and it would be a disaster if the guards and the chiefs got their hands on them. He threw out his chain. The armor didn't have their own consciousness. They soared into the sky at a steady pace. Stephen thought he'd succeeded when his chain penetrated the pillar of light, but it erupted into waves of heat. The chain was melted into molten iron, and the burned scraps of metal rained over the lake. Stephen quickly released his hold on the chain to prevent the heat from transmitting to himself. It was so hot that even the Killen might not be able to withstand it. His chain was a weapon from Phantasma Isle's treasury, but it had melted in seconds after coming in contact with the Asura King's residual energy. Seeing that the pillar of light surrounded the divine armor was impenetrable, the guards turned their attention back to the Ascenders. They surrounded Vlad and circulated their speed to the maximum. Every strike targeted his vital points. He deflected their blows with his sword, and the cycle repeated. Hundreds of rounds later, Vlad's back was covered in wounds, while a fist-sized hole had been punched through the two guards' abdomens. Then the guards didn't die. Their bodies had been formed from the energy in the water. As long as their bones weren't crushed, they'd continue defending the lake. It was clear that Vlad was at a disadvantage. Emil and Faye rushed towards him and pulled him back to shore. Killian and the beast were still engaged in battle with the Asuras, but they were quickly losing steam. Stephen needed their fight to continue, but he couldn't recklessly intervene and draw attention to his team. He formed a thought in his mind to telepathically communicate with the ice dragon. Prolong the battle as much as you can. When the Asuras see you, they'll think you're Killian's subordinate. They think that you're the culprit who stole from their warehouses and the reason behind their casualties. The ice dragon flew towards Killian and unleashed thousands of icicles at the chiefs with a flap of its wings. They shattered the icicles with their swords, and fragments of ice rained from the sky. But the ice dragon's bone-chilling freeze wasn't that easy to disperse. The chill in the air swept over the chiefs, and the frost crept up their ankles. Kagan cursed. How dare a beast like you go against the tribes? You're digging your grave. You're at your limit, the ice dragon provoked. Just wait patiently for your death. The cold air invaded the chiefs' bodies, attempting to freeze their blood and energy to turn them into ice sculptures. The chiefs weren't at their peak condition, but they weren't to be trifled with. They twisted their joints, and with just the right amount of strength, they forcefully crushed the ice accumulating on their body. The chiefs condensed a sky of weapons. Sabers, spears, swords, halberds, axes, and more shot towards the ice dragon. The ice wasn't that strong, but the attack itself was humiliating. If word got out that a beast had one-upped the chief multiple times, their reputation would be driven to the ground. Killian didn't know why the ice dragon had joined them this late in the game. Its icicles had only succeeded in riling up the chiefs. He assumed that Stephen had a plan that instructed the leaders of the beast clans to counterattack. Like Stephen had predicted, another chaotic battle broke out. He could see the black hole from here. It was gradually shrinking. Tempest Citadel space-time techniques aren't just for show. They might be able to seal the black hole. What are you going to do about the grudges towards Tempest Citadel after the war in the Asura realm? Liam asked. Zane and the Ascenders will target them as soon as the crisis is resolved. Stephen had been caught up in the conflict ever since he came back from the Asura realm. Liam's words reminded him of the dilemma he'd yet to find a solution for. I'm tempted just to let them handle it by themselves. If Tempest Citadel is wiped out, what are you going to do if another spatial rift appears? Another invasion like this could happen again. Stephen let out a frustrated sigh. I guess I'll have to force the elders to sit down with Zane and the Ascenders and come up with a compromise. Liam could already picture the tension. We've been fighting together with our lives on the line for a while. Hopefully they'll at least be willing to sit at the same table. It didn't take long for the battles in the air and on the shore to fizzle out. Everyone's energy was diminishing at a rapid rate, and many of them were forced to resort to primitive methods like swords to attack their enemy. The divine tree had turned into rotting branches and withered leaves. Its branches creaked as vines extended towards the Asuras on the shore. No matter how fast they were moving, they couldn't escape the vines. They were pulled into the clouds. When the battlefield was cleared of Asuras minutes later, the trunk burst from within. Wooden fragments shot out in every direction. The divine tree was massive, and the explosions lasted for half an hour. The shockwaves made it impossible to chase after the Asuras. Stephen's team, the Ascenders, Killian, and the Beast looked up at the sky in confusion. The trunk had been blasted to smithereens, but the top of the tree was nowhere in sight. If it was floating above the clouds, then it would become the perfect refuge for the Asuras. The Ascenders were disappointed. They'd been fighting nonstop for hours on end, but they'd gotten nothing for their efforts. The treasures inside Phantasma Isle's treasury were valuable, but the Asura King's divine armor was one of a kind. Stephen did his best to console him. There aren't too many Asuras left. The beasts are freed from their oppressive rule. When the celestial beast stabilizes the realm, he'll reward you for your contributions. Killian had made his principles clear when he awakened. No contribution went unnoticed. Stephen wasn't interested in the rewards, but the Ascenders were. The storm clouds dispersed, and the night sky came into view. The divine tree had disappeared, signaling the end to the battle. Everyone relaxed as the tension drained out of them. They weren't aware of it yet, but their guess as to what happened to the divine tree wasn't that far off. When the Meru tree extended past the clouds, it didn't just absorb the energy from the lake. At a certain height, it began to absorb the energy from the sun, moon, and stars. It didn't need the trunk to support itself. It had enough energy to hover in the sky. The spatial fluctuations increased around the black hole. The elders from Tempest Citadel carved 108 ancient symbols on the ground with their swords. Aside from the internal members, no one else knew what they meant. The blood-red water from the lake was drawn into the symbols as the elders chanted an incantation. The black hole was like dough being kneaded. Its edges fluctuated with the irregularities in space. The array's compression and the stability of the black hole were mutually exclusive. Tempest Citadel's success depended on which of the two forces were stronger. Stephen's team, the Ascenders, and the Beasts rushed over to the black hole, but they didn't know how to help. "The war is over," Emil announced. "We're going back to the human realm. There are grudges we haven't resolved yet, but we'll let Tempest Citadel resolve the issue with the spatial rift first." The 5 Ascenders turned into streaks of light and disappeared into the black hole, smoothly returning to the human realm. The Divine Tree had absorbed most of the water. The remaining energy wasn't enough for the Elders to complete the array. They couldn't use their inner energy because only the energy of the Asura realm could create fluctuations in space around the black hole. The Elders had no choice but to ask for assistance. Killian extended his right hand, releasing the energy he had absorbed from the lake. The symbols shone with the blood-red spatial fluctuation. The threadworms had absorbed a lot of energy as they dug tunnels around the lake. They also transferred their energy into the array. The black hole dimmed, and its spatial fluctuations began to weaken. It was time for the humans and the beasts to go their separate ways. Stephen didn't want to expose his blade's ability to open spatial rifts. He led Liam and Ezra to the Elder's side and prepared to leave through the black hole before it closed. Before leaving, Stephen turned to Killian for one last conversation. "It's time for us to go. If the Asuras come back, let me know and we'll fight together." "I've never met a human as interesting as you," Killian said with a chuckle. "When I have time, I'll visit the human realm for a stroll and see its wonders for myself." "Can you open a spatial rift?" "I can't, but there are cultivators in your world that utilize the power of beasts from other realms. When they summon that power, they open an invisible temporary spatial rift. It's convenient to pass through when different realms using their rifts. Don't be surprised if I show up one day. We'll meet again." Stephen had a more positive impression of the Yorks. Their origin made them indirect allies of the beasts. The black hole was almost invisible now. It was time to go home. Stephen's team and the group from Tempest Citadel dashed inside. They were greeted by the warm sunlight and familiar lush scenery on the other side. There was a group of martial artists on the lookout below the black hole. Everyone was staring intently, bracing themselves for another invasion. They were beyond relieved to see that it was the Sovereign, not an Asura. Jace was so glad to see him that he could barely contain himself. "Welcome back, Mr. Adams. How did it go?" "The spatial rift is closed. Let's hold a celebration and politely send the reinforcements away." A huge burden lifted from Jace's shoulders. "With you taking charge, there's no crisis that we can't overcome." Stephen laughed. "I didn't do much. The Celestial Beast was the one who unified the beasts to wage war on the Asuras." A festive atmosphere settled in the cultural city. It was more lively than New Year's Day. The reinforcements from other countries ate, drank, and enjoyed themselves. They were treated well before being escorted out of the country. Their contributions were minimal, but they were regarded as heroes when they returned home. The Elders from Tempest Citadel and their team quietly left in the midst of the commotion. Stephen still didn't know how to feel about them. As for the 5 Ascenders, they'd disappeared from the northwestern border. Stephen didn't join in the festivities. He went to the command center with his subordinates to delegate responsibilities. "Strengthen our border's defense and carry out a blanket search for any hostile forces remaining in the country. Warhawk and Maplewood have access to our territory. I wouldn't be surprised if they're plotting against us. Also, send someone to contact Scotty's representative about combat drills. Our 2 countries are allies. We need to prove to the outsiders that we're not pushovers." The media was forbidden to report on the Asura's invasion, but there were always some people who were in the know of the country's secrets. Rumors were probably spreading across the world, questioning the US and Scotty's competency. Conducting combat drills would help give the civilians a sense of security and prove that the US and Scotty hadn't fallen from their status as major world powers. "I'll bring the Leviathan unit's intelligence team and follow Tempest Citadel back to their territory in case the Ascenders are heading there to start a fight," Liam said. Stephen nodded. Liam was quite reliable in standing in for the Leviathan unit's leader. "Would you like to protect Tempest Citadel?" Liam asked. "Objectively speaking, it won't be easy for us to hold the Ascenders down. Zane also has a grudge against them." "I haven't decided yet. Spatial instability is beyond our understanding. It periodically strengthens and weakens. If Tempest Citadel's space-time techniques are as indispensable to protecting the human realm, for now, just keep an eye on them." Stephen was no closer to resolving the dilemma since the last time they had this discussion. Liam formed a small team of intelligence members from the Leviathan unit and headed for the island in the south. Stephen went to the VIP suite to check on Tristan and Zane. Like always, Tristan was indulging in a life of delicacies and wine without a care in the world. "Were you celebrating our victory ahead of time?" Stephen asked in disapproval. Tristan shrugged. "Life is precious. You can only live once after all. I need to make use of my time and enjoy it to the fullest." Tristan gave Stephen a once-over, and his gaze fell on the pendant forged from the fangs of beasts. That was a treasure he hadn't seen before. He wondered what else Stephen had gotten from his journey into the Asura realm. Stephen had seen that gleam in Tristan's eyes many times before. "It wasn't a complete victory. The Asuras escaped. During the battle, we came across a few pieces of divine armor, but they disappeared." Tristan was disappointed. If he was there, he would have stolen the treasure at all cost. Stephen glanced at Zane, who was looking out the window, lost in thought. He wasn't an open book like Tristan. Stephen had never been able to get a read on him. Zane had agreed to temporarily set his grudge aside, but that didn't mean he would let it go. Tempest Citadel used their space-time technique in the Asura realm to close the spatial rift. "They came back with us. What are you going to do now?" It wasn't possible for Zane to give up the resentment he'd harbored for thousands of years, but he was aware that his body had its limitations. He couldn't go against Tempest Citadel on his own. "I'm going to search for the Ascenders and see what they plan to do." Zane was persistent, and there was nothing Stephen could say to convince him otherwise. "I won't stop you, but keep in mind that Tempest Citadel has always been a mystery. If things get dangerous, come back and we'll figure it out together." Tristan decided to go with Zane. Challenging ancient martial artists would relieve him of his boredom. They made preparations and left the hotel not long after. Stephen boarded a private jet from the military back to Annapolis to see his family. He'd been gone for a while, and he missed them. After a long-awaited reunion, Kim couldn't help but complain. "There was no news from you or the media. If it weren't for the military updating me from time to time, I would have thought you disappeared into another dimension." Stephen hugged her with a laugh. "I have a lot of skilled martial artists around me. That wouldn't happen. The public doesn't know exactly what went on at the northwestern border, but they do know that we resolved the crisis on our own. The countries overseas won't be targeting us for some time. I'm more worried about Cadus. We investigated a lot of money into setting up the industrial chain. If anything happens, our losses will be immeasurable." "There's no need to worry," Kim said with confidence. "Most of the customs and airport staff are members of the Leviathan unit. Anyone coming into Cadus needs their approval." Did the royal family agree to that? "The public believes that our new bomb is being produced in Cadus. The royal family is cautious, so they've given us their permission." Ever since the public combat drill in the eastern waters, more than half of the world's weapons and equipment manufacturers had established a partnership with Kim in hopes of obtaining insider information about the bomb's blueprint. When they realize they won't be getting any information out of me, they might reduce the investment they're pouring into Cadus. "It won't come to that," Stephen said. "The U.S. and Scotty's military exercise at the northwestern border is about to begin. We'll reveal some of our small arms and light weapons and have them produced in Cadus. It'll become a profitable business your investors can't refuse." Kim's company represented the U.S. Her investors weren't fools. They wouldn't give up the opportunity to profit and get her on her good side. "By the way, Ash and Red are helping out at the factory with their people. They said they want to repay you for everything you've done for them. I appreciate their help, but they're having a hard time adapting to modern life. The Leviathan unit has been sending specialized personnel to monitor them and make sure they don't cause trouble everywhere." Stephen was well aware that Ash and Red's group was talented in combat, but not so much in manual labor. They were volunteering to help, so it wasn't that simple for Kim to send them away. "I can ask the Leviathan unit to teach them." Kim shook her head. "That's not what I meant. They're distracting the other employees. They're curious about everything. They like to chat with the people around them and ask all kinds of questions." There was no changing their curiosity, so Stephen could only find something else for them to do to pass the time. While Stephen was catching up with Kim and Valeria, a group of newcomers to the human realm were ransacking their house. The Threadworms and the Flood Dragon had followed Stephen through the black hole. They were especially curious about the lifestyle of humans. They never imagined life would be so peaceful and comfortable. The Threadworms transformed into a group of young men and women with similar features. On the surface, they appeared to be a small, close-knit family of brothers and sisters with lavender eyes. The Flood Dragon shifted into an enchanting young man dressed in black. They pretended to be Stephen's friends as they explored every corner of the house. They didn't see themselves as outsiders at all. No wonder the Asuras wanted to occupy the human realm. This is paradise compared to the wasteland back home. It's too bad they went about it the wrong way. It's much simpler to coexist than wiping out a species. That's what happens when you're greedy. The celestial beast had paved the path for a new era. and the Asura and human realms will become known as allies in the future. When Stephen went to the kitchen, he found the fridge and all the cupboards opened. The threadworms and the flood dragon were huddled over a pile of snacks and condiments on the floor. They waved when he passed by. One of the threadworms held up a container. "This is delicious. Human food looks weird, but it tastes good." "Those are biscuits," Stephen said. He pointed at the other container on the floor. "And that is honey, sugar, and oil. The outer packaging is made of metal and plastic. Don't tell me you ate that too." The threadworms and the flood dragon exchanged a glance before blinking up at Stephen. "We did. Human food tastes better than the ores and crystals in the Asura realm, but there's no energy inside." "The packaging isn't meant for consumption. Also, there's a limit to how much energy a human body can contain." The threadworms and the flood dragon shared another look before shaking their heads in pity. Humans are truly a fragile species. The ice dragon had shifted into a small dog with white fur. It was lying on top of the counter in the kitchen, looking dispirited. Stephen ran a hand through its fur. "What's wrong? Were you hurt during the battle?" "No, I'm just thinking," the ice dragon said, nuzzling his hand. "A member of my clan is interested in the human realm and wants to take a look." "Take a look? What does that mean? Are you going to open a spatial rift? Or do you want me to open one?" "That's not it. Every member of my clan is interconnected with one another through their spiritual worlds. Crossing between realms won't affect their stability." There were many beasts and gods like the Asura king who liked to create their own independent spaces after they reached a certain level of cultivation. The ice dragon spiritual world followed a similar concept. Sometimes, before the chaos in the Asura realm took place, members of the ice dragon's clan had crossed over to its spiritual world. They hid and watched the martial arts competition unfold from the shadows. They weren't that interested until they witnessed the talismans of the Tribulation sect. The sacred manual was divided into 3 volumes: Book of the Heavens, Book of Life, and Book of Destiny. A group of ascenders had created and left the sacred manual behind to provide guidance for those who lost their way. They never imagined that it would cause a conflict between opposing factions for thousands of years. A member of the Ice Dragon's clan happened to be one of the Ascenders' mount, and it had a deep understanding of the sacred manual's origins. Ever since the dragon saw the talismans, which were an imitation of the sacred manual, it had been pestering the Ice Dragon to let its students visit the human realm. Stephen was intrigued. "Feel free to invite your clan member over. I don't mind." "The student I'm talking about isn't that reliable," the Ice Dragon said hesitantly. "That's okay, I can handle it." As soon as these words left Stephen's mouth, pink bubbles appeared in the middle of the kitchen. They popped, and a small dragon with pastel iridescent scales condensed on the countertop. Stephen couldn't sense any fluctuations in energy coming from the iridescent dragon. It looked at him, the threadworms, and the flood dragon curiously. After a simple introduction from the ice dragon, the iridescent dragon quickly became part of the team. The ice dragon hadn't given it the okay to come to the human realm, so it had been stuck in its spiritual world for some time now. It had witnessed everything that had gone down in the Asura realm. A youthful, feminine voice echoed in Stephen's mind. "I didn't think a regular cultivator from the human realm could help the beasts overthrow the Asuras. They wouldn't have won without you." Stephen observed the iridescent dragon. It was small and cute. He wondered if there were any stuffed animals out there with a similar appearance, so he could buy one for his daughter. "Fighting isn't only about strength, it's also about strategy." "I see. I heard you're the leader of this country, and you have access to unlimited resources. Your people have found more than one fragment of the sacred manual. Will you be able to find the rest?" "Unfortunately, the world is vast, and there's not enough time and manpower to search for all the fragments." The iridescent dragon looked out the window. The human realm didn't seem that big. It didn't know what Stephen was talking about, but there was nothing important going on, so it might as well follow him and search for the sacred manual along the way. Stephen kept a fragment of the sacred manual at home. He took it out for the iridescent dragon to inspect. "If you're not in a hurry to find the secret manual, does that mean you don't plan on improving your cultivation?" "As you know, I'm one of the leaders of this country. I don't have much time to spare for personal cultivation." The iridescent dragon blinked and said, "Those are trivial matters. Don't bother with things that aren't important and focus on cultivating. Or you can always find a student and pass on your teachings." The ice dragon was circling Stephen and the iridescent dragon, watching their interaction. It lightly flicked its tail on the iridescent dragon's head, signaling for it to be careful with its words. My master is already one of the strongest human cultivators. That's precisely why he was chosen to lead the country. The iridescent dragon obediently kept quiet and focused on examining the sacred manual. Stephen thought seriously about his words. His cultivation had reached a bottleneck. He was stuck at the intermediate stages of the red dust immortal realm. Not even the divine energy from the lake in the Asura realm could help him break through. Maybe the key to progressing was the sacred manual. And just like that, he found himself with another strange mission. Stephen spent the next few days with his family. By the end of the week, he'd accumulated a mountain of work at the military's administration building. The staff was waiting for him to give them instructions. Multiple towns and villages had been slaughtered near the southwestern border, dividing the U.S. and Garan. The once prosperous and bustling region had become uninhabited overnight. The military base at the southwestern border had sent a team of guards to investigate, but none of them returned. Stephen put the report on the table. Is the King of Garan behind this? It's been a while since I've pressured him. Is he trying to take advantage of us because he knows that our combat force took a hit from the invasion? According to the latest intel from the front lines, the 15 towns and villages are close to our border, but they're considered to be on Garan's territory, the Leviathan unit's leader said. I don't believe they're culprits. The Leviathan unit's leader had examined the photos taken at the scene of the crime, but there were no leads to go on. The bodies appeared to have been crushed into a pool of blood and guts mixing into the mud. The culprit could be an ancient martial arts faction. There are lots of secrets hidden in the Blue River Mountains that even we don't know about. The Tribulation sect found Tristan's graveyard there. They might have attracted another faction's attention. Some time ago, the Blue River Mountains had suffered the flames of conflict and volcanic eruptions. It didn't take them long to return to the original state because of the humid and warm climate. The threat at the southwestern border was rising fast, so Stephen decided to personally check out the situation. He took an international flight to Garan, which was less than 300 miles away from the border. The silence and tension at Garan's imperial court was broken by Stephen's arrival. Wes and Aston were the only ones accompanying him. The king of Garan, Carson Laurent, ordered the chefs to prepare a lavish meal for the sovereign and his companions. Welcome back to Garan, Mr. Adams, Carson said at the dining table. What brings you here? Stephen took a sip of the wine and skipped the pleasantries. I don't have a lot of time. Did you provoke anyone lately? What have you found from your investigation? Stephen meant business, and Carson was intimidated. He stammered out a reply. The culprit appeared and disappeared as quickly as they came. They didn't leave any clues behind. Our investigation is still ongoing. You sound quite calm about all this, Stephen pointed out. If the culprit attacks your imperial court next, are you still going to be this relaxed? Are you okay with the Laurent family disappearing from the line of succession? I understand our capabilities are lacking, Carson admitted. I hope you can lend us a hand. He didn't usually ask other people for help, but this was a predicament he couldn't resolve on his own. The number of casualties among Garan's guards was much higher than the United States's. Carson was worried that Stephen wouldn't agree, so he asked his subordinates to bring out 2 boxes. They were filled to the brim with jewels. Consider this a small token of my appreciation. Whichever decision you make won't affect the long-term relationship between our countries. Keep it, Stephen said. This is an issue that affects Garan and the U.S. We'll head out and investigate after this meal. When the dishes were cleared, Stephen, Wes, and Aston climbed into the cars prepared for them and headed to the villages near the border. Carson joined them. This was his first time investigating the scene of the crime. He didn't trust his useless subordinates to protect him, but he mustered up his courage with Stephen by his side. The villages had turned into ruins hidden by trees and flowers. At first glance, it was hard to tell innocent civilians had been slaughtered a few days ago. Wes and Aston got out of the car first to do a preliminary search. The bodies had cleaned up days before. There's no traces of gunpowder or fire, and the bloodstains are spread evenly, Aston reported. The crime was most likely committed by a martial artist who destroyed the villagers' bodies with one forceful blow. Carson felt nauseous when he heard his analysis. Judging from the destruction the culprit caused, they're at least at the martial grandmaster realm and above, Wes added. They didn't use any blade-like weapons. They killed with their inner energy alone. Okay, several guards have gone missing here, Stephen said. Widen the area of your search. Yes, sir. Carson's subordinates were astonished. If they spread out in an isolated area like this, they'd be at risk of being killed off one by one. The Sovereign's companions didn't seem to share the same concern. Wes and Aston were experienced and capable, But the villages spanned a large area, and it was impossible to conduct a thorough search in such a short amount of time. There were forests, rivers, lakes, and swamps. There were all obstacles that got in the way of their investigation. Stephen was wondering how long they'd have to spend here when one of the threadworms spoke in his mind. "We can investigate for you. We'll do it quietly." "How? Are you going to burrow into the ground? That'll attract too much attention." "Yes, but we won't be the ones digging the tunnels. We can create tiny clones of ourselves. They'll be as small as earthworms." A cluster of tiny white earthworms condensed around Stephen. They spread out and burrowed into the soil. Half an hour later, they found a uniformed worm by the guards of the United States' southwestern border. This was evidence that the guards sent to investigate had been killed by the culprit. The rest of the investigation led to a dead end. The culprit didn't leave any witnesses or survivors. Carson stood on the side with his subordinates like statues, not knowing what to do. The insects buzzing around the trees and flowers made him uneasy. The harsh environment was too much for his pampered lifestyle. He spoke up when the sun began to set. "Mr. Adams, it's been several days. The culprit likely isn't in the area anymore. There's no rush investigating this case. Should we call it a day?" Stephen nodded in agreement. Having these burdens stay by his side was a waste of space. "You can head back first. I have a few more things to look into." "All right, stay safe. I'll wait at the Imperial Court for your good news." Ever since the conflict between Garan and the U.S. was settled, Carson had left the border mostly unguarded. Guards from the U.S. were the only ones stationed here. No matter how many people were at the border, none of them would be able to resist the United States' troops if they were to advance. When Carson and his idle group of subordinates left, Stephen sensed a faint aura coming from the forest in the distance. The threadworms, the flood dragon, and the ice dragon sensed the same thing. They left his spiritual worlds in their human forms to scan their surroundings. Wes and Aston unsheathed their blades and aimed their strikes at the forest. Waves of light scattered the trees and flowers, revealing a middle-aged man standing in the clearing. His clothes were made of animal skins, and his demeanor resembled a hunter who lived in the wild. Stephen couldn't get an accurate feel for the man's aura. It was like a storm inside the depths of an ocean. Sometimes it was calm, and other times it surged violently. "Did you kill the people in this village?" The man laughed in response. Without warning, he lunged for Stephen. Wes and Aston moved to block him, but he stopped their blades and shattered them with his fist. The force almost knocked Wes and Aston off their feet. "Mr. Adams, there's something strange about him," Aston said. "We should leave and track him down with backup." Stephen reached out with his aura. There was no one else around. The man had come alone. "Not yet." Stephen slashed with his sword, and a blade of light curved across the clearing. It struck the man in his back, but his skin was like rubber. The blade bounced off of him. The ice dragon released a cold mist. Ice and frost accumulated on the man's body, and the threadworm slammed him tens of feet deep into the ground. "Don't kill him," Stephen said. "We need to interrogate him." The threadworms blacked away. "He's not dead. There's no scratch on him." The man leaped out of the pit and landed lightly on his feet. There was a wild look in his eyes as his gaze swept over Stephen's team. Stephen didn't have concrete evidence, but he had a feeling that this man was the culprit. He unleashed a storm of energy waves. The man twisted his limbs into unnatural angles and shattered the ice. Then he spread his arms and closed his eyes to take Stephen's attack directly. When the dust settled, the man was standing in the same place. He was unscathed. "My expectations for you were too high. None of you are on my level." The threadworms and the two dragons attacked the man from 3 different directions. His fist was fast and packed a powerful punch. It sent the threadworms and the dragons crashing into the ground. Wes and Aston braced themselves for another round. While they were in the middle of a heated fight, the 2 elders from Tempest Citadel and their team appeared from the forest. The internal members raised their swords to the sky. A golden light pressed down on the man, slowing his movements. His body felt like lead. He glared at the elders. "How long are you going to trap me? Tempest Citadel trained me to fight for the world." The man's affiliation came as a surprise to Stephen. The man was at the late stages of the immortal realm, but he had the potential to break through to the true immortal realm. He was a valuable asset to Tempest Citadel. No wonder the elders and the internal members weren't going all out. "You make it sound like our goal is to take over the world. Who told you that?" the elder demanded. "Our purpose is to prevent invasions, not kill civilians. Your cultivation improved faster than I expected, but you don't hold the same values as our faction." The golden light brightened, and the ground around the man caved in. He resisted the pressure and charged the internal members. He threw out his hand, and within seconds their bodies shriveled and collapsed in a heap. Their blood and spiritual energy had been drained. The threadworms and the blood dragon were familiar with the man's technique. "It's similar to the beasts of the Asura realm. He's devouring cultivators by converting their blood and spiritual energy into his own energy, but his technique is more effective and much faster. There's a hole at the center of his palm with sharp teeth. It looks like a mouth. He's using that to drain the cultivators." The man was a mystery, and going head-to-head with him was risky. The ice dragon shifted into its original form and flew Steven's team into the sky. The threadworms spat out balls of iron sand. They condensed into the shape of a human warrior. A storm of sand swept into the air when the man's punches and kicks landed, but the sand reformed in the next second. The two elders raised their swords and infused their energy into the golden array. The man saw what they were doing and moved to kill them, but the sand warriors got in his way. The sand was indestructible no matter how many times he punched a hole through them. His gaze fell on the threadworms on the ice dragon's back. The man dashed into the sky to crush the threadworms, but the golden array enveloped him, trapping him where he was. He glowered at the elders. "When I get a chance, the first thing I'm going to do is absorb your energy." The elders didn't respond. They bound him with chains, and the abrupt fight came to an end. Stephen walked up to the elders. "This man slaughtered innocent civilians of 15 towns and villages at the southwestern border. Is your faction going to take responsibility?" "Mr. Adams, remember where we are. We're not in the U.S., we're in Garan. If anyone should take responsibility, it's that useless king, Carson Laurent." Wes and Aston stepped between them to stop their discussion from escalating into an argument. "We just want to know what's going on. Tempest Citadel claims to be a righteous faction, but one of your affiliates led a massacre of innocent civilians. We need an explanation from you." The elders conceded. "All right then, if you must know, this happened because of the 5 Ascenders." The truth of the matter was actually simple. After the war in the Asura realm, the Ascenders went back to the human realm and found a remote location to recover to their peak condition. Then they proceeded to eliminate Tempest Citadel. The 5 of them were remnants of their spiritual energy, but they retained all of their memories from their main body. Their martial arts techniques were a force to be reckoned with. When Tempest Citadel ambushed Ascenders in the past and stole their cultivation, they stored it inside the man, Gabriel, to create an artificial martial artist. As the energy accumulated, his independent consciousness became exceptionally pronounced. He rarely listened to orders, but to prevent the faction from being destroyed by the Ascenders, Tempest Citadel released him and ordered him to hunt them down. "You and our research team specialize in different fields, but your skills with modern technology are on par," Stephen said. "Our techniques have been passed down in the faction for thousands of years," the elder explained. "We have a deep foundation and a close relationship with many research institutes overseas. If you really want to bring peace to the world, then kill the Ascenders. It's understandable that they hold a grudge against you. Ambushing and attempting to kill them when they're at their peak of their martial arts career isn't as righteous as you claim. It's ridiculous to expect them to give up their hatred." The elders turned away. They weren't interested in continuing a pointless conversation. "If you're not satisfied with our explanation, then speak with the head of our faction." The elders left with the internal members, taking Gabriel with them. It was already evening, and Stephen wasn't in the mood to go back to Garon's imperial court. He headed towards the southwestern border with his team. There were several fortresses constructed from reinforced concrete in the Blue River Mountains. Guards were stationed there. As they were passing by, a group of familiar faces emerged from the forest. It was the 5 Ascenders! Stephen chose his words carefully. "I understand how you feel, but you've seen what Tempest Citadel can do. It's not wise to go against them. If you keep this up, they'll do everything in their power to kill you." "They're an ancient martial arts faction," Faye said stubbornly. "All things come to an end eventually, including them." The Ascenders were pretending they weren't fazed by Tempest Citadel's artificial martial artist, but the truth was that he was far more powerful than them. They had a lifetime of experience, but Gabriel was a monster. Fortunately, Stephen's team was one step too late and didn't see their embarrassing scuffle. The Ascenders followed Stephen's team to the border. Jerome, the captain of the guard in the northern lands, had been temporarily transferred to the southwestern border. He arranged accommodations for them. They sat around a table of delicacies and wine, and no one had an appetite. While Stephen was thinking about how to persuade the Ascenders to not risk their lives, they were coming up with ways to convince him to help them. With the United States' military on their side, they'd have a higher chance of eliminating Tempest Citadel. Emil broke the silence. Tempest Citadel lives in a secluded mountain range on an island to the south. Their internal members are skilled martial artists, and they also have a variety of different businesses. Their wealth far exceeds the royal family in Garan. You've seen what their artificial martial artist is like. He's a dangerous, violent maniac. If the faction loses their control over him, Garan will be the first to suffer. Tempest Citadel has always been a low-profile faction, Stephen argued. Openly attacking them will result in needless casualties. After half an hour of verbal sparring, neither side came to a unanimous decision. Stephen could only inform Carson of what he'd discovered and ask him for his opinion. It was already late into the night. Everyone dispersed and went to their respective rooms at the hotel. When Stephen slipped under the covers, the iridescent dragon, who'd been quiet all this time, appeared beside him and sat on the bed, bundled in the sheets. It was an adorable sight. "You're not a nocturnal dragon, aren't you? It's late. I'm going to sleep." The iridescent dragon prodded his back. "Do you want to hear about my great discovery?" Stephen rolled over. He was tired, but he was also interested in what the dragon had to say. "Tempest Citadel's arrays are recorded in the sacred manual. I think they have one or more fragments in their possession." "Are you sure?" "Of course, my teacher was the mount of one of their authors." Stephen's dilemma deepened with every new revelation related to Tempest Citadel. If they wanted to get the fragments, they'd have to use force. "You heard what the Ascenders said, right? They're going to take advantage of my position to send soldiers to attack Tempest Citadel, but it's not that simple." "You're the leader of this country," the iridescent dragon pressed. "Don't be a coward." "There are things that need to be taken into consideration before waging war. It's more complicated than you think." Like the Ascenders, his discussion with the iridescent dragon went nowhere. He needed to wait for a reply from Carson. If the King of Gron thought Tempest Citadel posed a serious threat to his country, then Stephen would have a justified reason to attack. The iridescent dragon opened its mouth, releasing a stream of pink bubbles. They reflected scenery from a mountain. "This is where Tempest Citadel lives. I found them using the aura of the sacred manual fragment you showed me." Stephen observed the reflections. He didn't know much about the mountains near Gron, but he recognized the two elders and the internal members that followed him everywhere. The buildings around them were simple and unadorned. The walls and pavement were engraved with complex diagrams of arrays. "Is this where they keep the fragments?" "At least one of them," the iridescent dragon said. The puzzle was slowly coming together, and the final piece depended on Stephen's decision. The risk Tempest Citadel posed was glaring, but their space-time techniques were indispensable. To attack or not to attack was the million-dollar question. He decided to sleep on it. The Sovereign's arrival made Jerome nervous. He spent the night organizing military affairs and gathering intelligence on potential enemies and waiting for an opportunity to report it to Stephen. The next morning, Stephen called a meeting with the Border's upper management. He showed them the pictures he'd taken last night of the locations reflected in the bubbles. "This is a mountain range of Garon's Island. They're an ancient martial arts faction, and one of their members is the culprit behind the recent massacre." The staff compared the pictures with the satellite map. It was easy to find the exact location. "This mountain is one of the most dangerous places in Garon. Its altitude is more than 20,000 feet, and it's full of beasts and poisonous vegetation. Garon's officials don't set foot here unless it's necessary." When the military base at the southwestern border did business with merchant caravans, they often heard of the dangers on Garon's Island. Bones and skins of beasts and medicinal herbs from the mountains sold for a hefty sum of money. Stephen had encountered far more dangerous beasts in the Asura realm. The danger didn't deter him. Tempest Citadel had chosen a dangerous location to set up their faction to use the terrain as a natural barrier to avoid being discovered. "With the supply of weapons you have on hand, how confident are you in eliminating all the martial artists on the island?" If the military base was equipped with the bombs that had been developed recently, they could theoretically raze the island to the ground. But the problem was, they didn't have that at their disposal. The weapons they had weren't cut out for the job. Not to mention, attacking another country's territory was a direct provocation. Jerome thought carefully before answering. "Our weapons aren't enough to wipe out the island. If you'd like to attack the ancient faction in person, we'll come with you." "No, your team's cultivation is too similar to their internal members. It'll be a fight to the death. Their elders aren't easy to deal with either. As for using weapons, I'll have to discuss this with the king." While Stephen waited for a reply from Carson, he instructed Jerome to mobilize warships and head to the port closest to the island. Tempest Citadel was involved in many businesses. To develop them, they had to rely on the trading routes at sea. If the U.S. threatened Garon's coastal waters, Tempest Citadel might be more open to negotiation. The two elders reported to the leader of Tempest Citadel, Thorin Ambrose, and the trouble their artificial martial artist had stirred up. "Taking in external cultivation damages the brain. Gabriel's ignoring our orders. All he cares about is killing and violence. He's a ticking time bomb." Tempest Citadel wasn't interested in taking over the world, nor did they care about eliminating the other ancient martial arts factions. Gabriel was created to defend their faction, but even if he took down the 5 Ascenders, there was no guarantee that he wouldn't target them next. The situation had spiraled out of their control, and their losses would be much higher than the gains. Thorin was meditating in the garden with his eyes closed. "Where did you detain him?" "He's frozen in a cave. He's slaughtering civilians, and the U.S. and Garon aren't thrilled about it. If the other ancient factions hear about this, they won't be pleased either. It's not a good idea to provoke this many enemies." An internal member came over to report that Garan had sent Imperial Advisor to pay them a visit. He brought an expensive gift with him, but he was most likely here to question them about the massacre. Greet him and then send him on his way, Thorin instructed. Garan is weak and there's not much they can do to us. The task fell on the elders. They welcomed Garan's Imperial Advisor with the highest etiquette and brought him to the guest room. It was spacious and bright. The best tea and desserts were served. You've come a long way, the elder said with a smile. The mountain is dangerous and there's very few people around. We chose the location to set up our faction because we prefer to distance ourselves from worldly affairs. The advisor caught the implication behind his words. He was an uninvited guest, and he wasn't welcome. Many martial artists felt a sense of superiority towards non-cultivators. If it weren't for the massacre, the elders would never have let outsiders past the main gate. The advisor cut to the chase. A few days ago, there was an attack on our towns and villages. There were more than 1,000 casualties. The culprit is a member of your faction. We would like a satisfactory explanation from you. He didn't provide evidence, but Tempest Citadel was a prideful faction. The elders didn't ask him for proof because the culprit had been exposed, and it'd be shameful to pretend like they didn't know who it was. It's normal for martial artists to fight and kill. One of our members went out to train, but he casted a technique incorrectly and lost control of himself. We apologize for what happened. The advisor was at a loss when the elders admitted their oversight so readily. He wasn't planning to take the culprit back to the imperial court. If he went berserk again, the entire royal family would be massacred. What happened to him? He's in a coma. We've imprisoned him in a dungeon. We'll compensate you for the losses. The elders gestured for an internal member to come over with a checkbook. He wrote a check for $200 million and handed it to the advisor. The culprit had received his punishment and Garan had received compensation. The advisor didn't feel the need to press the issue. The topic changed, and the three of them chatted like old friends who hadn't seen each other in years. With that, the case came to a close. The 5 ascenders were also on the mountain. Phantasm's Isle's defensive array had remained in place for thousands of years. It went without saying that the ascenders were also skilled in arrays. I can't feel the aura of that martial artist anymore. Where's he hiding? Skylar asked. Most ancient factions have a forbidden area, Emil said. The elders probably took him there. We need to decide on our target. Are we going to kill the leader of the faction, the elders, or the other members? It would be easy to start a rampage, but they might not come out of it alive. Let's get rid of a few of the elders first, Vlad suggested. If we cause a commotion, the leader or the artificial martial artist will show up. Are you sure we can take them down? We brought weapons from the island's treasure vault with us. We forged them so we have a fighting chance at least. If we can't beat them, then we'll just run. The artificial martial artist doesn't care about Tempest Citadel. If he shows up, he'll start massacring their members. Meanwhile, Stephen was making the most of his time and carrying out an inspection in the Blue River Mountains. The greenery spanned more than 500 miles, and there was no trace of the past volcanic eruption. The fortresses were up to standard, and he was satisfied with the guards' experience. There are many mysterious areas in the Blue River Mountain we haven't explored yet. If you find anything, report it as soon as possible. It looks like there aren't that many beasts left after the conflict and volcanic eruption. Jerome was relieved that Stephen hadn't said too much about the fortresses, but his comment about the beasts was concerning. It sounded like he didn't see them as a threat. Are you planning on limiting access to the mountains and designating it as a conservation area for wildlife? Stephen had a new perspective on the beasts ever since he met Killian. If they tamed the beasts in the human realm, they could serve as extra lines of defense in addition to the borders. I'm thinking about it. Does your team have any beast tamers? Yes, but it's risky for them to handle beasts that are too fierce. There's no rush. Let's take it slow. If we do this right, we'll have more allies on our side. After the inspection, Stephen boarded a private jet to Garan to visit the king. The Imperial advisor brought him up to speed. Tempest Citadel had admitted their mistake, but that was all. The culprit would be punished by the faction. Carson had asked his people to monitor Tempest Citadel on the mountain. He was finally doing something useful for once, but Stephen didn't have high hopes for his subordinates. If the U.S. went to war with Tempest Citadel, the outcome would depend on the Ascenders. What businesses are they involved in? Stephen asked. Hotels, spas, clubs, restaurants. There's a lot more. They dabble in everything. Most corporations these days seek protection from martial artists. Tempest Citadel has money and martial artists. No one would turn them away if they offered to collaborate. Is it possible to weaken their control over their businesses? I'm afraid not. It'll cause a chain reaction and the unemployment rate will increase. There's also inflation to worry about. Stephen leaned back in his seat. Now you care about your people. You accepted Tempest Citadel's bribe to cover up the massacre. That's the same as giving them control over your royal family. Why don't you just hand over the imperial court while you're at it? Carson lowered his head in shame. There was nothing he could say to refute Stephen's accusations, because they were true. The iridescent dragon's voice sounded in Stephen's mind. I found sacred manual fragments in the Asura realm. We need to get them back. Are you sure? Ascenders in the human realm created the sacred manual. How could they be in another realm? You're just a human cultivator. You wouldn't understand the mysteries of dragons. Trust me, my senses are credible. The iridescent dragon was firm and left no room for argument. It'd be a disaster if the Asuras came back and got their hands on the sacred manual fragments. Stephen gave a random excuse to end the meeting with Carson and slipped out of the bustling imperial court. He found a remote neighborhood on the outskirts of the city, opened a spatial rift with his blade, and went inside with Wes and Aston. They mounted the threadworms, and the iridescent dragon guided them to their destination. It sensed the presence of the sacred manual in the dwarves' underground cave. Ever since the Asuras tribe fell to ruins, the species they'd oppressed finally saw the light of day. They no longer had to hide. When they reached the forest, Stephen noticed the dwarves strolling in open space. The threadworms used to be on bad terms with the dwarves, but after their common enemy was removed from the picture, their past animosity was erased. They now considered each other old acquaintances. The threadworms took the initiative to greet them. How does it feel to wander the surface openly? You don't have to hide underground and forge weapons anymore. It's all thanks to the celestial beast's wisdom and divinity, the dwarf in the lead said. In the future, every species in our realm will be equal. The dwarves glanced at Stephen, Wes, and Aston. They didn't have much of an impression of humans, but every species in the realm had heard human cultivators help the beast win the war. Why are you here? The war's over. Don't tell me you're here for sightseeing. Stephen laughed. I heard the dwarves are talented at forging. I'd like to see you work one day. The dwarves puffed out their chests with pride. You won't be disappointed. If we weren't good at what we do, the Asuras wouldn't have taken us captive a long time ago. The iridescent dragon appeared in a flash of pink light. It sniffed the air to track down the energy fluctuations of the sacred manual using its keen sense of smell. The dwarves' hearts melted from its adorable appearance. Most of the beasts we've seen look fierce and aggressive. It's rare to come across a small and cute dragon. Dragons don't like conflict, the iridescent dragon replied. We show ourselves when the world is at peace. There's a fragment of the sacred manual in your cave. Can you show it to us? The dwarves exchanged confused glances. What's a sacred manual? What does it do? Stephen took out the sacred manual fragment he'd brought from home. It looks like this. It's a metal plate with carvings. The dwarves' eyes lit up. They disappeared into the tunnel and returned with a pile of fragments 10 minutes later. You're talking about these, right? Stephen, Wes, and Aston were floored by the pile of sacred manual fragments. They'd never seen so many in one place. Where did you get all these? Stephen asked the dwarves. Have you been to the human realm? No, but we crossed paths with a group of human cultivators before. They asked us to forge an imitation in return for the original product. The mystery behind the talismans of the Tribulation sect was finally solved. In the past, they'd visited the Asura realm and found the dwarves to replicate the sacred manual fragments. They went on to improve the imitation until they developed the talismans they used in contemporary times. The dwarves held up the fragments to Stephen. If they're useful to you, then just take them. Thank you for your generosity. There's no need for that. You helped the beast take down the Asuras. This is our gift to you. The ice dragon appeared beside Stephen and took out the jars of wine it stored inside its body. The climate and terrain of the Asura realm made planting crops an impossible task. Brewing wine was even more of a dream. It was a delicacy limited to privileged species in the realm. The dwarves opened the jar, and the fragrant aroma of wine attracted their companions in the tunnel. They scurried to the surface and crowded around the jars. There were at least 1,000 of them. You can drink as much as you want, Stephen said. I'll bring you more when you're done. The dwarves' eyes sparkled with anticipation. It wasn't every day Stephen made the trip to the Asura realm, so he decided to visit Killian. The war ended abruptly, so they didn't have much time to talk before the black hole closed. The ice dragon flew Stephen, Wes, and Aston to the Myriad Mountains. The beasts had already begun constructing buildings. Maybe they would eventually build a city in the future. Killian's follower, Briar, noticed them descending from the sky and went over to give them a warm greeting. Mr. Adams, it's nice to see you again. Looks like the rumors were true. It didn't take long for human cultivators to progress. You've even found a way to cross realms. What brings you here? I came to see Killian and check on the beasts. You're just in time. I'll go get him. The celestial beast was an existence born from an accumulation of the beast's evil intent. When it was consumed to a certain extent, he would vanish into thin air. His next awakening would take tens of thousands of years. Killian didn't want to wait that long. As soon as the war ended, he isolated himself and recovered his energy to stabilize his existence. Killian had looked worse for wear at the end of the war, but today he was as ethereal and imposing as the first time Stephen saw him. You recovered quite well. The Asoras haven't shown themselves since then, so I took the opportunity to focus on restoring my energy. Stephen remembered the conversation he had with Jerome about the beasts in the Blue River Mountains and asked Killian for his opinion. Killian was open to the idea of Stephen bringing some of the more docile beasts back home. There were many of them who were interested in the human realm. With that settled, the topic of their conversation shifted to the predicament at hand. After the divine tree destroyed its trunk, its crown remained above the clouds. It was like a canopy woven from leaves. The remainder of the Asoras were hiding there. What are you planning to do about them? Stephen asked. The Asoras weren't the only ones who suffered casualties, Killian said. The beasts are still recovering from the previous battle, and I haven't restored my energy to its peak yet. The chiefs are alive. It won't be easy for us to deal with them. Stephen's cultivation at the intermediate stage of the Red Dust Immortal Realm was useless in a battle of this scale. He couldn't help, but he knew who could. The AI chip inside Warhawk's scientists, Amber and Mitty, relayed useful information back to Dr. Dalton. Their research on biochemical technology had improved, and they'd resolved many of the flaws in its original design. Ever since the U.S. revealed their new weapon, Warhawk's higher-ups have been pestering Stephen and asking if there was anything they could do to help with their makeup for the lack of support during the Asora's invasion. He could try asking Warhawk's higher-ups to send 200,000 of their genetically modified soldiers to the Asora realm to pressure the Asoras into coming out of hiding. Killian agreed. I'll leave that to you. If that doesn't work, we'll mass-produce the Asoras as weapons and have the bird-type beasts drop them onto their hiding place. Killian's backup plan was well thought out. As the Threadworms had said, he gained knowledge and experience with every reincarnation. His progress was surprisingly fast. When he first awakened, he didn't have knowledge of technological weapons, but after some experience with them, he understood their general mechanics and how to utilize them in battle. No matter how big the canopy in the sky was, it was made of flammable branches and leaves. A series of explosions might be able to burn it down. Stephen's next stop was the Threadworms' home. The tribe was no longer around, and their technological advancements had disappeared with them. There was no shortage of ores or crystals buried underground. He planned to ask the Threadworms to swallow some of them into their stomachs and bring them back to the human realm. The ice dragon landed at the edge of a swamp. The Threadworms were excited to see their home again. They summoned their companions using their unique language. More Threadworms surfaced from the mud. They were much smaller. Stephen's Threadworms were given an overflowing supply of energy-rich resources and had absorbed a large amount of spiritual energy. They were bigger and had reached a later stage in their evolution. Stephen couldn't understand their unique language. Unlike his Threadworms, the cultivation of their companions' cultivation hadn't reached the level where they were capable of human speech. He wouldn't be able to communicate with them unless he formed a blood contract. The Threadworms decided on the mine closest to the swamp. Their estimated output was 6 tons per day. The weight referred to the ores and crystals after purification. When they swallowed them, it took some time in their stomachs to remove the impurities. Their special digestive system saved Stephen processing time and related costs. The Threadworms would deliver a batch once every half a month. When everything was settled, Stephen prepared to go home with Wes and Aston. Before leaving, he looked up at the sky. The crown of the divine tree was hidden beyond the red clouds. Maybe it was because it was too far, but he couldn't sense its aura. During the battle, the leaves of the divine tree had scattered across the realm and camouflaged among the ordinary trees and flowers. The Asoras hiding in the sky attached their spiritual energy to the leaves and monitored the situation below. Tartador was furious when he saw Stephen in the Myriad Mountains. He was determined to kill him. Kagan and Spence were sitting not too far away with dejected expressions. The crushing defeat had dealt them a devastating blow. Their confidence and fighting spirit had vanished. The lake is ruined, and the guards have disappeared. We're not qualified to communicate with the Asora King using a divination. No one's here to help us. What hope do we have to defeat the beasts? Staying in the sky for the rest of our lives isn't a solution either, Tartador argued. The tree hasn't stopped moving, Drake said. I think it's looking for something. It was hard to tell in the sky, because the blood-red backdrop was all around them. Drake had been using the position of the sun, moon, and stars to gauge the canopy's direction. The chiefs were stuck here from sunrise to sunset. The aimless waiting made them restless and pushed them to the brink of despair. At that moment, a star in the night sky dimmed as if it had been swallowed. A black hole appeared in its place. It resembled the spatial rift that had opened in Tartador's territory. A humanoid figure emerged from the black hole and headed for the canopy. The aura he emitted made the chief's hair stand on end. Why do I sense the Asora King's aura? Are we losing our minds from being in the sky too long? He's already ascended to a higher plane. His aura is unmistakable. That's our god. The figure landed on the canopy. His appearance resembled a typical Asura, but his horns radiated a unique luster of colors. The chiefs and the other Asuras knelt down in unison. They held their breaths and said nothing. They had no words to explain how they went from being the ruler of the realm to war criminals on the run. The Asura King's avatar scanned the small crowd. Is this what's left of your army? If it weren't for the Meru tree, there wouldn't have been anyone left for me to meet. He observed the ground using the leaves from the divine tree. Beasts were everywhere. They'd turned the tribe's territories into their own. An awkward silence settled, and the Asura King knew he wouldn't be able to count on the chiefs and the remainder of the army. His plan was the only reliable method to turn things around. During the fight, the leaves of the divine tree attached themselves to the human cultivators and obtained vital information. I'll find a way to open a spatial drift and infiltrate the human realm. We'll plunder their resources and kill the rebels. The human realm is the Asura's second home. This is a wasteland. Don't spend your time fighting to the death with the beasts. The Asura King's plan left everyone dumbstruck. Spatial rifts weren't that easy to open. If the celestial beast discovered their scheme, he would never let it happen. The lifespan of the Asura King's avatar was limited, and he couldn't stay here for too long. He didn't care if the Asuras understood him or not. He gathered his energy at his fingertips and swiped the air. A rift came to life. It flickered with the stars of the galaxy. The chiefs were the first to recover from their shock. We'll lead the remainder of our army and occupy the human realm as soon as we can. Once our forces grow strong, we'll launch a counterattack against the beasts and exterminate each and every one of them. With the chiefs in the lead, the Asuras flooded the spatial rift like a tide. The Asura King's avatar transformed into a sapphire necklace that hung around Tardador's neck. Opening a rift had drained the avatar dry. He couldn't maintain his form and had to shift into a necklace. When the Asuras opened their eyes, they found themselves in a world of ice and snow. The wind chilled them to their bones. Coincidentally, they'd ended up in Scotty's western region where the ice castle of the Tribulation sect lay in ruins. It was covered by snow and frozen from the equivalent blizzards. Those who weren't familiar with the snowy plains wouldn't know what lay beneath their feet. The harsh environment had turned the region into a no-man's land, but to the Asuras, the freezing temperatures were hardly a threat. The Asura King's voice sounded from the sapphire necklace. Head east for 60 miles and you'll reach the ocean. Find somewhere to set up camp. There were only around 500 Asuras left. They were the elite of the elites. They followed the Asura King's instructions and headed to the seaside. They didn't encounter any humans or houses along the way. Most of Scotty's citizens lived in the warmer climate to the east. When the Asuras reached the sea, they constructed small houses made of ice bricks. They settled down within a few hours. Tardador stood by the shore, admiring the necklace. His status rose after he wore the Asura King's belongings. We found shelter, but where do we go from here? How do we blend in with the humans? The Asura King had obtained extensive information on the human realm with the help of the leaves of the divine tree. Rest up for tonight. Tomorrow morning, bring a small team with you to Garan. It's a tropical climate, and there's an ancient martial arts faction on the island to the south. Use them to integrate into human society. How hard could it be? Tardador asked. Human cultivators are as weak as insects. Don't let your guard down. Based on the information I've gathered, the ancient faction I've selected is more powerful than the others. If you charge in recklessly, their numbers will overwhelm you and your efforts will go to waste. Tread carefully. Use your wisdom instead of your fists. The Asura King's order was equivalent to a supreme command. None of the Asuras were qualified to refute, not even the leader of their group, Tardador. On the outskirts of Garan's royal city, civilians were mysteriously vanishing into thin air. The city guards couldn't find any clues at the scene of the crime. The victim's clothes were scattered over the ground, but the person themselves had disappeared. The captain of the guards was slowly losing his mind from the immense pressure. If there was no progress within 8 hours, the guards were required to report to the imperial court to carry out a blanket search. Coincidentally, the sovereign was staying in the city as a guest. If they couldn't solve the case, Garan's reputation would suffer, and the captain of the guards would have to face Carson's fury. At this time, Stephen, Wes, and Aston were touring the museum and the imperial court with interest. Carson was the imperial advisor were behind them. Mr. Adams, I heard your family's business is involved in jewelry and luxury goods, Carson said. You must have a deep understanding of gold, silver, antiques, calligraphy, and paintings. I'm not that knowledgeable. My wife knows a lot more than I do. Is that so? Nevertheless, my museum is small. There aren't that many valuables to look at. There's no need to be humble. The material doesn't necessarily represent the value of the product. The culture and history behind the items is what makes them valuable. Stephen gestured to a dazzling assortment of crowns and staffs. Take these, for example. One look is all you need to grasp the glory of your royal family. Stephen's nonsense was worse than an amateur art appraiser, but when Carson and the advisor heard his appraisal, their mood brightened. Garon's martial artists had never been that strong, and the royal family accomplished the bare minimum to keep their country running. That was how the Laurent family had maintained power in all these years. Next to the crown were portraits of the past king. As expected, you're similar to your ancestors, Stephen said. Your family exudes a natural air of royalty and authority. Carson followed up without missing a beat. My achievements can't be compared to yours. You're a hero in the U.S. I have a lot to learn when it comes to leading a country. They exchanged compliments as they toured each floor of the museum like they were on vacation. Stephen sensed a familiar aura as he approached a bulletproof glass case. There were several fragments of the sacred manual inside. The iridescent dragon's voice echoed in his mind. See, what did I tell you? The king has fragments. When did it become this easy to find the sacred manual? I guess those with power and influence can sense the profound nature of the fragments they find and keep them as valuables. Stephen's smile widened as he patted Carson's shoulder. The friendly gesture made him flinch. He hadn't forgotten the scorching sensation that almost burned him alive the last time Stephen touched him. Carson threw Stephen's hand a cautious look. Mr. Adams, if you have a request, please let me know. Did something in the museum catch your eye? I'm interested in these metal plates. Where did you get them? Carson couldn't possibly remember the history of every valuable item he put on display in the museum. He awkwardly waved for the Imperial advisor to step forward and explain. These were embedded in the armor of an enemy general. Its defensive properties made him almost invincible. After winning the war, we took the metal plates back with us and stored them in the museum. Aside from that, we don't have any other information. The war happened more than 20 years ago, and the weak country on the other side of Garon had been long razed to the ground. Stephen didn't hesitate to take the fragments. When he touched them, the other fragments in his bag gave off a slight vibration. He gathered enough to piece together the Book of Destiny. Stephen found an excuse and left the Imperial Court with Wes and Aston. A defensive array had been set up around his VIP suite at the hotel. It was a secure and private room. The iridescent dragon appeared and hovered over Stephen's shoulder with anticipation. This trip wasn't a waste. I've never seen a volume of the sacred manual before. Your senses are incredible, Stephen praised. My people have searched the entire country for this, but they've only found a few fragments. He tossed the fragments onto the bed, and they pieced together like a magnet. The rough edges disappeared, and a book made of metal appeared. The word Destiny was written on the cover in an ancient language. Stephen picked up the book and flipped through it. It was made of metal, but the texture was similar to regular paperback books. He still couldn't comprehend the words and symbols recorded, but the backlash to his spiritual world was no longer there. The iridescent dragon perched on Stephen's shoulder and touched the pages with its forehead to try to comprehend the words with its clan's unique power. When it didn't work, the iridescent dragon pulled away in disappointment. Maybe you need something to activate it. There's no rush, Stephen said. Progressing your cultivation takes time. It can't be done overnight. Just then, two familiar faces barged into the room. It was Tristan and Zane. They were covered in blood, and their clothes were in tatters. Stephen was surprised to see them. How did you two end up like this? Did you confront Tempest Citadel head-on? We sneaked into their faction in the mountains and fought the elders and the internal members, Tristan explained. We were outnumbered, and they took advantage of the terrain. Wes and Aston gave them a clean set of clothes to change into. After washing off the blood and dressing their wounds, the two of them sat down dejectedly at the dining table. Your cultivations aren't what they used to be. You should approach this from a strategic point of view. Tristan knew right away that Stephen was in Garon because of Tempest Citadel. You have a plan, don't you? Hurry up and tell us. Don't keep us guessing. Tempest Citadel's fatal weakness was their artificial martial artist, Gabriel. They couldn't control him. He was on bad terms with the faction, so he was the ideal candidate to cause internal strife. Tristan and Zane had stopped following the Ascenders at some point, so they hadn't met Gabriel. Needless to say, Zane was disgusted. Tempest Citadel stole the Ascender's cultivations and stored it inside the man to create an artificial martial artist. If he ever escapes their faction, all hell will break loose. We can have the Threadworms dig into the other faction's interior through an underground tunnel and release Gabriel from his shackles. Then we'll convince him to join us. Tristan thought Stephen's plan was too naive. He's an artificial martial artist, but that doesn't mean he's an idiot who'll let you manipulate him. Who knows, he might even try to kill us, even if we're the ones who release him. Don't worry about that, Stephen said. I'll sneak in with Wes and Aston. You two have a different job. Find the Ascenders and join them. The 5 Ascenders were elusive and preferred to fight alone, but their skills were undeniable. Tristan and Zane would have a higher chance of taking down Tempest Citadel with their help. In the evening, Stephen left the hotel with Wes and Aston and set off for the island. He studied a detailed map from Garon's military and planned their route into the mountain. Aside from Tempest Citadel, there were many civilian-operated industries on the island. Their infiltration would fail if they were spotted. The threadworms burrowed into the sand and dug a tunnel leading to the depths of the mountain. Halfway into their journey, Stephen sensed the necklace of beast fangs resonate with the wild animals and beasts in the surrounding forests. Killian had mysteriously told him that he would understand the necklace's function when the time came. Stephen guessed that this was the right time Killian was talking about. He brushed his fingers over the fangs and infused his inner energy into the necklace. His spiritual energy integrated into every inch of the mountain and the air. The animals and beasts became his companions. Stephen noticed a flock of crows overhead gave them instructions using the necklace. They changed their direction and flew toward the buildings. It was getting late, but the lights were still on. There was a dense crowd of internal members practicing their martial arts. Thorin stood to their side, overseeing their training. The more he watched, the darker his expression became. In the end, he turned to walk away. An elder hurried after him. "If you're not satisfied with the progress, I'll train them personally." "That's not it," Thorin said. "Regardless of how much they train, they'll never advance as fast as Gabriel. He's a special case. We created him to handle issues our faction couldn't resolve on our own. We can't possibly force our internal and external members to absorb cultivation like him." Thorin understood where the elder was coming from. As the respected leader of Tempest Citadel, he shouldn't take shortcuts to strengthen his faction. But recently, he had an ominous feeling that a calamity was about to befall their action. He didn't know how serious the crisis would be, and the only way to prepare was to have the internal members train harder. The elders seemed to have sensed his concerns. "Why don't you take a short trip to the royal city to de-stress? Our faction's involved in many entertainment industries." Thorin shot down his suggestion. The more a martial artist progressed in their cultivation, the less inclined they were to indulge in worldly entertainment. "You and the other elders should train in your spare time like the other members. A crisis can happen at a moment's notice." "Did you perform a divination?" the elder asked. "No, it's just my intuition." "What's there to worry about? We have Gabriel. No martial artist can match up to him." While Thorin and the elder were engrossed in conversation, a flock of crows circled the sky. Through their eyes, Stephen had a full view of the layout of the buildings, patrol routes, and general distribution of the internal members. He sensed the energy fluctuations of multiple defensive arrays set up in the valley back at the mountain. The threadworms burrowed deeper into the soil and used the energy fluctuations as a guide. The layer of rock separating them from the surface covered Stephen, Wes, and Aston's auras. The threadworms made it to the valley at midnight. They broke through the surface and everyone crawled out of the tunnel. There were several caves in front of them. Howls of wild beasts came from inside. One of the caves was decorated with bells hanging from red satin ribbons at the entrance. It was an array that detected intruders. The tighter the security, the more confidential and valuable the items hidden inside would be. There was a chance that Gabriel was locked up inside this cave. The threadworms condensed a ball of iron sand and connected it with its vision. The sand rolled past the bells and into the cave without triggering the array. There are scrolls, weapons, and sculptures inside. The artificial cultivator is at the back of the cave. His wrists and ankles are shackled. "Any ideas on how to free him?" Stephen asked. "The iron in our sand can take on the shape of a key, but once he's freed, our group will become his target. If Gabriel started a fight, the entire faction would come running. Tempest Citadel was a large faction. There weren't too many skilled martial artists wandering around. Even if Stephen hypothetically had 9 lives, he wouldn't be able to escape if they surrounded him." Wes and Aston shared Tristan and Zane's skepticism. "Are you sure Gabriel will be willing to listen to us?" "There's no guarantee, but no one wants to be locked up," Stephen said. "If he wants to regain his freedom, he'll have to compromise. If he was someone who listened to reason, Tempest Citadel wouldn't have locked him up in the first place." Gabriel's punishment was more severe than what the elders had let on when Garon's imperial advisor questioned them. The elders had taken him to a cave and thrown him into a pond. The absolute zero temperature had frozen him into a lump of ice. They only pulled him out and thawed the ice in case the advisor demanded to see him. Wes and Aston made a valid point. Stephen was once again caught in a dilemma. Footsteps pulled him through his thoughts. Are the members of patrol coming? They'll find the tunnel. The threadworms reassured him. I can create a metal powder to repair the cracks on the ground and isolate our auras. Stephen, Wes, and Aston returned to the tunnel, and the threadworms covered their tracks. A group of crows landed on the treetops nearby. The necklace was still active. They were connected to Stephen's spiritual energy, giving him access to their vision. He was stunned when he saw the faces of the new arrivals. It's Tartador. How did he cross over into our realm? And why is he here? Shouldn't he have stayed in the sky in the Asura realm to recover? Tartador was here with a small team of Asuras. Their scorched skin and horns gave them a demonic appearance. They resembled the demons from horror stories. The iridescent dragon appeared and landed on Stephen's shoulder. His sapphire necklace is giving off an aura of a cultivator. Someone's helping him. You can sense that? Why can't I sense anything? Your spiritual energy is lacking. You should find an opportunity to work on your cultivation. Tartador was in deep thought as he stared at the cave. He couldn't figure out how to free the artificial cultivator. He was forced to ask the Asura King for help. The bells at the entrance will alert the other cultivators. How do we bypass them? Is your brain made of rocks? You're a chief. This shouldn't be an issue. The sapphire necklace glowed, and a thick layer of rust condensed on the surface of the bells. Walk in. There's nothing stopping you now. Thank you for your help, Tartador said respectfully. He went in alone. The other Asuras stayed outside to keep watch. A ball of iron sand rolled through the entrance and into the dark corner of the cave. It was connected to the threadworms, and they transmitted their vision to Stephen. Gabriel opened his eyes when he heard footsteps. Where did you come from? You're not human, nor are you a ghost. Breaking into caves proves you're not an ordinary being. Are you here to kill me? Tartador quickly revealed the purpose of his trip. The Asura King was certain that this man was one of the strongest cultivators in the entire human realm. If the Asuras convinced him to join them, it wouldn't take them long to take over the realm. Despite Gabriel's hatred towards Tempest Citadel, he wasn't interested in conspiring with an enemy. I suggest you leave. You're not worthy of being my ally. Tartador used to be the leader of the Black Horn tribe. He was above tens of thousands of Asuras. Gabriel's words were a humiliation, and he wouldn't take it lying down. Tartador threw out his fist at lightning speed, and it landed square on Gabriel's chest. Gabriel didn't have a reaction. I didn't feel a thing. You're weaker than an insect. Stop embarrassing yourself. His body had been strengthened by cultivations from deceased descenders. Even though Tartador was an Asura, he would have to rely on weapons if he wanted to do any real damage. Release Gabriel from his shackles, Stephen said to the threadworms. Let them fight it out. Won't that attract Tempest Citadel's attention? It doesn't matter. They'll be drawn into the fight. The ball of iron sand in the corner unraveled. The grains of sand crept up the walls and spread over the ceiling. They fell on Gabriel's shackles and slipped into the keyhole. The sound of gears turning echoed through the cave. Before Tartador or Gabriel could figure out what was happening, the shackles unlocked and fell to the ground. Gabriel took this unexpected development in stride. He stood up and stretched. I don't know if I'm lucky or if you're just unlucky. We haven't agreed on anything, but I've been freed. Gabriel was created to protect Tempest Citadel, but he was treated like a rat in the alleyways. Anger welled up inside him as he thought about the years he spent trapped on the mountain. He had no interest in becoming anyone's puppet. Now that Gabriel was freed, he needed an outlet to vent his frustrations, and Tartador was the perfect target. Tartador met Gabriel's fist with his own. The collision sent waves of energy crashing into the walls of the cave. Cracks spread along the surface. The Asura standing guard outside felt the tremors. What was that? Does the chief need help? He told us to keep watch at the entrance in case the faction shows up. We should stay here. Tartador drew his sword as he closed the distance between him and Gabriel. The Asura King was watching from the necklace. He couldn't lose face in front of his god. Gabriel casually blocked the sword with his bare hand. His skin was like rubber. Tartador exerted as much force as he could, but he couldn't penetrate his skin. While Gabriel and Tartador were locked in an intense battle, Stephen set his sights on the Asuras outside the cave. He couldn't deal with them personally because it would attract the faction's attention, but with the necklace, he could ask the animals to take care of them for him. Aside from giving Stephen access to the animals and the beast's vision, the necklace also gave him the ability to transmit his strength to them. It was similar to how the Asura King bestowed his divine power to the Asuras using the lake. The crow's eyes turned red, and they dove for the Asuras at the entrance with their claws outstretched. The Asuras' defenses were high, but they also had their weaknesses. There was nothing stopping the crows from gouging out their eyeballs. The Asuras ducked, shielding their faces and swatting at the pests. The crows were as annoying as flies. Where did these crows come from? Did Tempest Citadel send them? Are they testing us using animals? They're looking down on us too much. The Asuras reached out with their spiritual energy. They sensed the plants, trees, and wind, but there was no trace of cultivators. The crows were covered in Stephen's inner energy, enhancing their speed and strength. They barreled into the Asuras' abdomen and back, almost knocking them over. The bushes rustled. A group of apes jumped out from the grass and charged at the Asuras without warning. Their fists were covered in raging flames. Because their body structure resembled a human's, they were able to mimic Stephen's martial arts. An explosion sounded from the cave, and Tartador ran past the entrance in a fluster. He waved for his team to follow him down the mountain. He didn't care about his reputation anymore. Not only had he failed to win over the artificial cultivator to their side, he'd lost the upper hand in their fight. The crows flew away, and the apes returned to the forest. If even the Asuras couldn't get through to Gabriel, no one would be able to. The threadworm slithered out of the tunnel and flicked the bells with its tail. A clear and melodious sound echoed through the mountain. The sound attracted the entire faction. Within minutes, a dense crowd arrived at the scene. "Mr. Adams, shouldn't we leave?" Aston asked. "Tempest Citadel has sharp senses. They might find us." "Not yet. They don't have time for us. They have a bigger issue on their hands." An elder scrutinized the bells scattered on the ground with a solemn expression. He was the one who'd set up the array. He couldn't have made a mistake. Gabriel sauntered out of the cave with a smirk. "Are you here to hang out with me? Was I always this popular?" The elder was in charge of the faction's rules and regulations. He spent most of his time on the mountain and rarely left the island. He was strict and commanding. "Gabriel, you've caused enough trouble. We gave you a chance to reflect on your actions in the cave, but you didn't take it." Gabriel's expression darkened. He hated being reprimanded by the elders. "I'm your creation, not your captive. If you try to stop me, don't blame me for turning against you." The elder held out his hand. The sky darkened and thunder rumbled overhead. "Betraying your family is a sin, and sinners must be condemned." Gabriel's aura surged as bright red flames swirled around him. He held nothing back. Compared to Tartador, this was a real battle. Bolts of lightning rained down from the sky. His flames burned brighter and cut through the lightning, soaring into the crowds. The radiance dispersed the darkness of the night. Gabriel was trained as a weapon of war. He hadn't cultivated every single one of Tempest Citadel's martial arts techniques, but he was familiar with them. He was a walking encyclopedia. The temperature on the mountain rose sharply from Gabriel's flames. The tunnels the threadworms had sealed began to crack. Stephen told Wes and Aston that it was time to leave. Once the surface of the tunnel caved in, Tempest Citadel would discover them. They ventured deeper into the tunnel and left the way they came. Gabriel relied on his fist to force the elder and the internal members back. While they were regaining their bearings, he turned and ran down the mountain before reinforcements could arrive. He was confident in his martial arts, but he wasn't sure if he could defeat Thorin. Stephen's infiltration wasn't as successful as he'd hoped. He wasn't expecting the Asuras to show up. "Look for Gabriel. He doesn't have money on him or any identification. He'll be forced to hide on the mountain, the island, or the city." "If we find him, should we make contact?" Wes asked. "No, just track his movements." Wes and Aston changed into casual clothes and left the hotel to search for Gabriel. Gabriel's escape confirmed Thorin's concerns of an impending crisis. He didn't say a word as he took his seat at the head of the table in the main hall. The rest of the members lowered their heads and waited for his fury. Tempest Citadel had been around for thousands of years, but not once had Gabriel left the mountain. He was unruly, but they'd always kept him in check. Letting him escape was a grave mistake. The internal members had thoroughly searched the mountain, but there was no sign of Gabriel. He'd most likely escaped to the city. The elder in charge of the faction's rules and regulations had set up the array in the cave, and it had failed at a crucial moment. He had to take responsibility for his negligence. He stood up and apologized, ready to face his punishment. Every elder was important to the faction. Thorin had no intention of punishing him. His priority was to find Gabriel. He'd absorbed the cultivation of countless ascenders. Even Thorin wasn't sure he'd come out on top if they fought. Never mind that. Contact the external members outside the faction and the government. Tell them to search for Gabriel and strictly guard customs, the airports, and ground checkpoints. The methods were the most effective against ordinary fugitives, but they had to do what they could. The elders left the main hall with the internal members, leaving Thorin alone with the other two elders. Last night, I carried out a divination. An invader from other realms is on the mountain. Thorin's announcement surprised the two elders. They'd recently sealed the spatial rift in the Asura realm. Where did these invaders come from? Are you talking about the Asuras? A divination isn't 100% accurate. They were almost wiped out of their realm, and we closed the rift. How could they have crossed over? Thorin believed in his divination. There are many ways to open a spatial rift. The Asuras have nowhere to hide from the beasts. It's not surprising they found some way to cross over to the human realm to seek refuge. Searching for the Asuras in the human realm was like finding a needle in a haystack. Their survival skills were different from humans. They could hide anywhere. Thorin couldn't cast the divination technique again. If he used it too frequently, he'd receive backlash for prying into the secrets of heaven. I heard the Sovereign is in the country for diplomatic discussions with Garon's king. We're not on good terms, but we've fought side by side before. Should we tell him about the Asuras? The elders' suggestion didn't align with Tempest Citadel's image. Their faction was proud and aloof. A few enemies from another world couldn't shake them. Let's wait and see what happens, Thorin said. If we really do have a common enemy, then we'll consult the Sovereign and ask him to join forces. To confirm the divination results, Thorin led the two elders to the caves to search for any clues left behind. When Thorin inspected the traces of battle and the shackles in the cave, he found a piece of cloth. The material didn't exist in the human realm. You two have been to the Asura realm. Do the Asuras wear clothing of this material? The elders examined the cloth. It resembled the fabric of the four chiefs' clothes. Their team of internal members had suffered heavy casualties after their trip to the Asura realm. If an Asura had crossed over, that would mean their mission had failed. As the external members moved out to carry out Thorin's orders, there was a subtle change in the royal city's atmosphere. The members kept their guard up. They cast wary glazes at every corner, preparing themselves for an ambush. Stephen slept until noon before lazily getting out of bed to work. Whether it was good or bad news, it wouldn't come this early. The ice dragon flew over the city above the clouds. There were no suspicious individuals in sight. We need to lure the Asuras out of hiding, Stephen said. How are we going to do that? We're not going to do anything. We're going to relax. The ice dragon didn't understand, but all Stephen said was, You'll see, before getting ready to head out. Wes and Ashton had returned to the hotel after losing track of Gabriel. Stephen took them with him. He rented a cruise ship and began his tour along the coastal waters. He lounged on beach chairs with Wes and Ashton under an umbrella and enjoyed the sea breeze. To an outsider, Stephen appeared to be a tourist on vacation with his friends and enjoying his youth. But while he was relaxing under the umbrella, his gaze hidden by a pair of sunglasses swept across the ships in the vicinity. Tempest Citadel has more properties than I thought. Their logo is on most of these ships. Do you have a plan? Ashton asked. Stephen was familiar with operating a business. It was similar to running a faction. He knew how important money was to Tempest Citadel. With so many members, they needed a large amount of financial support. If their businesses took a turn for the worse, they would need to find alternatives to make up for their losses. Cutting off their wealth is the easiest method. Carson's on the same side as Tempest Citadel when economic interests are involved, Wes said. We won't be able to convince him to go along with it. There's no need to make things so complicated. Someone will do it for us. Stephen chanted a spell, and a massive shadow appeared below the ship. It was the blue whale he'd explored the depths of the oceans with to find Phantasma Isle. The whale was a beast with an AI chip expanding its knowledge base and improving its strength. It's been a long time since we last met. How have you been? Life in the ocean must have been quite comfortable. The whale's voice sounded in Stephen's mind. The ocean is my home. With the AI chip, I can go wherever I want. No marine creature can threaten me. The whale circled the surface of the water excitedly. It was stronger than the rest of the marine creatures, but it had never had an opportunity to test its strength. The only time it could let loose was when it was hunting in the deep sea for food. Do you have something for me to do? Stephen motioned to a ship in the area. Remember that logo. Sink all of the ships with the same symbol, but don't make it too obvious. Turn it into an ocean disaster. That's an easy task. What about the crew and civilians? Help them back to shore. The Asora's arrival in the human realm wasn't a good sign. If worse came to worst, Stephen would need to ask Tempest Citadel for their assistance. As the Sovereign, he couldn't openly antagonize them. The sun began to set. The ocean was destined to be stormy after night fell. Waves surged in a whirlpool on the surface of the water, pulling in the ships nearby. As soon as a disaster struck, the phones of Garon's customs department rang nonstop. Every employee had to work overtime. Rescue ships rushed into the storm, but when they were faced with the whale's overwhelming power in the ocean, they had to choose between the crew and the supplies. The choice was obvious. News of the huge losses spread to the Imperial Court in the middle of the night. Carson drowsily walked into the hall and sat on his throne. The ministers were waiting for him. The storm wrecked 33 transport ships and 18 cruise ships. The losses amount to more than $17 billion, the Imperial advisor reported. Carson was stunned by the astronomical amount. How'd you come up with that number? All of the cargo was lost, the advisor explained. Gold, silver, high-end electronic products, and more sank to the bottom of the sea. Many companies in the city are on the verge of bankruptcy. His words hung in the air. It didn't matter who shouldered the losses. Garon would never be able to recover from this. The ocean disaster would soon cause a chain reaction, and the economy would begin to decline. The ministers suggested using the funds in the treasury to subsidize the shipping companies and have them pull through the crisis first, but Carson argued that the large-scale expenses would disrupt other jobs and worsen the issue. He decided to ask Tempest Citadel for help and request support from the Sovereign. Both of them were known to have deep pockets and a hefty amount of resources. Stephen slept through the storm. When morning arrived, the hotel's entrance was packed with high-ranking officials from the Imperial Court. They regarded the Sovereign as their financial backer and had to show the utmost respect. The hotel's staff couldn't contain their curiosity. What brings you all here this early in the morning? The Imperial advisor forced a smile and gave a random excuse. He represented Garon. It would be a disgrace to reveal that they were here to ask the leader of another country for money in front of this many people. The advisor and his team quickly filed into the lobby and took the elevator to the top floor. Stephen knew exactly why they were here. Garon assumed their ships and cargo had sunk to the bottom of the sea, but in reality, the whale had swallowed everything and preserved them. It had control over the corrosion of its gastric juices. The fragment ships and goods were sitting in its stomach in good condition. Stephen and Garon's officials took their seats in the living room around a table of tea and snacks. The U.S. and Garon are close allies. Feel free to speak your mind. I'm more than happy to help. The Imperial advisor plastered a smile on his face. Thank you, Mr. Adams. We lost so many ships and goods in the ocean disaster last night. The ship's companies at the ports are going bankrupt. It's affecting our industrial chain and supply of resources. We have no choice but to seek external assistance. Stephen nodded sincerely. How much do you need? The advisor understood Garon's position. They didn't have the right to demand financial aid from the U.S. The more, the better. I'll leave the amount up to you. 500 million, Stephen said, holding up a hand. I'll also make arrangements for other corporations to do business in Garon. Their investment will help revitalize the impacted industries. I'll arrange staff and technology to complete the procedures in the shortest amount of time possible. Some time had passed since the shipping companies of the United States' eastern port expanded to Cadiz. Doing business in Garon would help them develop further. However, my support can't resolve a problem of this scale. Tempest Citadel's involved with many businesses at the port. Some of the ships belong to them. They're a wealthy organization. These losses are nothing to them. Stephen introduced Aston with a smile. Walking through Tempest Citadel's front doors would be more useful in gathering intel instead of sneaking around. Tempest Citadel is a famous faction in the world of martial arts. Would you like my capable assistant to accompany you? The advisor agreed. The ocean disaster and declining economy weren't national secrets. Aston changed into the same uniform as the Imperial advisor and joined his team. Even though a fraction of the sunken ships belonged to Tempest Citadel, they weren't qualified to meet with the head of the faction. The elder in charge of the faction's businesses was in his room, sighing as he listened to a report from his student about the ocean disaster. Tempest Citadel owned multiple businesses and were involved in numerous collaborations. To manage them all, they had set up their company's headquarters in the royal city for convenience. His student was the vice president, and he'd done his best to accumulate wealth for the faction. One disaster at sea had turned his student's efforts into nothing. It's strange that all of our ships sank, but only some of Garon's were affected. Did you investigate? My team and I went out to sea after the crew was rescued and brought to shore, the elder students replied. The storm was over by then. Everything sank to the bottom. I contacted the customs department. They told me there was no trace of technological weapons. Their radars have high sensitivity, so their claims are credible. The storm was a natural disaster. The elder had his doubts. There had been multiple strange incidents within the faction recently. Gabriel escaped, and Desoras had appeared in the human realm. An external member entered the room and informed them that the Imperial advisor was here to visit. The advisor and his team were escorted to the gardens. The fragrance of flowers was in the air, and the birds chirped in the trees. It was a peaceful environment. Aston steadily released his aura to sense his surroundings. The elder walked out with his team of external members and joined them at the table. Welcome to our faction. We're honored by your presence. It's a pleasure to meet you, the advisor said with a smile. Tempest Citadel holds a high status in Garon. We're not that different. After exchanging greetings, the advisors went straight to the main topic. Tempest Citadel was wealthy, but they weren't as rich as the sovereign. What could compare to the national treasury of a major world power? He wasn't expecting much from the elder. Tempest Citadel had also suffered losses. How would they have any money to spare? As you may have heard, the ocean disaster last night has affected the economy. Before the compensation from commercial insurance is in place, we need to use our own funds to deal with the losses in advance. The real estate industry generates endless tax revenue for Garon, the elder said. Shouldn't you have sufficient funds? Are you telling me to return to the Imperial Court empty-handed? The advisor asked sternly. We're business partners, not strangers. You've been monopolizing various industries over the years. Would you like the government to investigate your accounts? Tempest Citadel didn't have much to offer, but the advisor was determined to obtain at least some form of compensation. The elder reluctantly gave in. Things would get complicated if the government was involved. How much do you need? $200 million. The U.S. has offered $500 million in financial aid. I took that into consideration as well as other factors to come up with this amount. It's not possible to give us the payment up front. Installments will also work.